All right. Good afternoon. You are welcome to the program Dialogue in Diaspora, the afternoon session of our discussion on African issues and diaspora involvement in African issues. This afternoon, we'll be talking about poverty and development in Africa. There is an organization that is involved in dealing with such issues in Africa. That organization is called the VSO, that's the Volunteering Service Overseas. That organization is committed to issues around poverty and African development. And joining me in the studio today is the Tanzania Country Director of Volunteering Service Overseas, VSO, Jane Van Water, on the show today. Jane, you are welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me.
You flew into London purposely for this program. You're based in Tanzania, as the country director of VSO. You quickly want to tell us what is VSO?
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and it's a very nice program, so thank you very much. So VSO is an international development organization. We work in 25 countries across the world with about 15 programs in Africa, West, South, and East Africa. I'm based in Tanzania, but I'm also coordinating our program on private sector development, developing local private sector. VSO is involved in 4 work areas. One is education, improving the quality of primary and secondary education, and working with local ministries of education to improve the way they deliver teacher training, school management, and as a result improving numeracy and literacy for the kids. The second program is health. There we work mainly in mother and child health, looking at reducing infant and child mortality. Then the third area of work is livelihoods, where we work on private sector development, as I mentioned, supporting local SMEs, improving vocational training, so more young people have chances to find a job, but also working in agriculture, moving from subsistence farming to commercial farming and increase livelihoods of people living in rural areas. And then the fourth area of work is governance, which is very important, looking at how we can increase citizen engagement, working with local civil society organizations to defend the rights of vulnerable groups, people with disabilities, youth, women, and supporting them to advocate for government to do more to support their cause. So it's quite a large spectrum of programs. And the way we do it, it's very particular. We do using volunteers, hence the name, Voluntary Service Overseas. We recruit professionals. The average age is 47 years old, so quite experienced people in the UK, but also across the world, including African diaspora. So we work a lot with people from Africa living, for example, here in London. And we invite them to come as technical advisors to support the delivery of our projects. So an example in health, when we look for a pediatrician or we look for a gynecologist to support our mother and child health project, we will look for doctors here in the UK to come and support the project implementation and do local training or capacity building of local doctors. But it could be also nurses, or it could be people specialized in hospital management. So it's not only the medical function, but also the management function. And this model is working very well because there are a lot of people who for different reasons who are interested to volunteer. Some of them are retired, so they have the time. Some of them lived in Africa or are originally from Africa and they want to give back. Or they want to find an opportunity to go back to to their country of origin to support the local development.
Okay, all right, Jane. Let's start with the one you mentioned, the last one, about the issue of governance. I mean, of course, if you take a look at Africa, huge resources, both human and natural resources. How would you assess government and governance in Africa?
Okay. I think it's difficult to give a general opinion because...
Yeah, let's take a look at some examples like countries. Say, for instance, one of the biggest, largest country in Africa. You talk about Nigeria, you talk about South Africa, say go Ghana. A bit of examples. How do you look at government and governance?
I think governance is key for the sustainable development of a country, and I think a lot of African government understood it. Of course, there are still some challenges in many countries.
Such as?
Tanzania, for example, where I'm based, there are good examples of governance, but of course there are a lot of issues like corruption, which has to be...
Is that limited to Tanzania alone?
No, and it's not limited to Africa alone. I would say it's a global issue, but particularly in some countries in Africa. But I would like to give first a positive note. I see a lot of potential because often in the West we look at Africa as a continent with a lot of issues. But I would like to give a positive view first. That there are a lot of opportunities. You mentioned natural resources. Private sector, many of those countries in sub-Saharan Africa are growing by more than 7% annually. Of course, growth alone doesn't mean a reduction of poverty, but it means that there is a potential to transform this growth into local economic development and local social development. And there the governance is very important. So governance is not only about democracy or about citizen engagement or about reducing corruption. It's also about having the right socio-economic development program and having the right priorities. And I want to give an example in Tanzania. There is a big program called Big Results Now, which is an initiative that has been implemented in Asia, mainly in Malaysia. And the Tanzanian government is taking the example of Malaysia and saying why those countries in Asia have developed a bit faster. And we want to take it back to some African countries. And the idea of Big Results Now is to prioritize development instead of going in every direction, to say, okay, let's see our most pressing issues and focus on that and have a very good plan with clear deadlines on how we are going to achieve that. And that includes accountability. And that's also linked to governance. And I think that's the way to go, making government much more accountable for the delivery. And not just, speaking about, I think corruption is a big issue, but it shadows a bit some of the other issues. Some of the countries don't make the right economic choice or social choices. An initiative like Big Results Now that can focus investments and decisions on some certain area, I think this is a good direction.
Okay, Jean, it's still on government and on governance. Of course, we know that mortality rate in either child mortality rate or even life expectancy. Life expectancy is very low in Africa. Yeah. Child mortality rate is very high in Africa. Children not going to school, very high in Africa. Is that as a result of the function of poor policy decision and management on the part of African leaders or deliberate desire of the people not to want things to change?
I think we should first look at the demographics. I mean, the fact is that in most of those countries, you have a very high natality rate. So you have a fast-growing population. Most of those countries have more than 2% annual population growth. It's massive. If you apply, again, a country like Tanzania with currently 50 million people, it means every year 1 more million people arriving, being born. As a result, also, it means a very young population. The average age in most of those, the median age in most of those countries is around 18 to 18.
And that should ordinarily be an advantage, unlike what we have, say, like in Europe or UK, where we have an aging population. Yeah. In Africa, some African countries, we have a growing, energetic population. Yeah. We should be an advantage, but it is not.
I agree with you, it's an opportunity, and especially, as you mentioned, if you compare with Europe, with an aging population, And as a result, you should see more transfer. With one of the things I'm trying to promote with our voluntary service overseas is like you have an aging population in Europe, where you have some skills they could support development and training in African countries, where you have a young population which is asking for more skills development and more training. So it's an opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge. Access to education, an example. The Millennium Development Goals, which are finishing this year in 2015, have put education as one of the priority. But the priority was enrollment, the percentage of children going to primary schools. And they've reached, most of the countries have reached the objective, was more than 95% of children go to primary school. And the problem is that, I mean, they went to school, so we can applaud the goal is achieved, but there was, that was at the cost of quality. So children go to school, but does it mean are they learning? Sitting in a classroom
does not mean they're learning.
Doesn't mean they're learning. On average, in some countries, again, I will give an example of Tanzania where I'm based. On average, a teacher spends only 2 hours a day in the classroom, while he or she should spend at least 7 hours.
So what does she do with the rest of the hour?
Local businesses around the school, and that's an issue again of governance. The problem is that a teacher is paid a very low salary, and so as a result, they cannot live and they cannot support their family with such a low salary. So what they generally do is that they have a side business, a local shop near the school, for example, which they have to run. And
so they leave the children in the classroom and they go to run their other businesses.
Exactly. And so the problem, and one of the things that we encourage at VSO, we made a study called Valuing Teachers, valuing not only in terms of providing the right professional development, but also in terms of providing the right salaries for teachers. And I would like to speak more about education, because I think it's the key for you asked me about governance, but actually for me the key thing about development in Africa is education. Knowing that 50% of the population is below 15 years old. And so you have a whole generation of kids growing up
not
now,
having the right education.
Not having the right education. If they don't have the right education, they won't find a job, or they won't have the capacity to develop and manage.
So where would the future of the continent be then? What would be the future of the continent if over 50% of the growing population lacks basic education, like ability to do the right thing in a complex world as we are?
So that's what I'm advocating for, a massive investment in education. I think if you see all the development priorities, and as I mentioned earlier, the initiative like Big Results Now, trying to prioritize development in some areas, education should remain one of the key.
So what role is, like other institutions like USOPOL or the private sector in education? Are there no private people investing in education, like having their own private schools where teachers are fairly paid and they have that private initiative to monitor the teachers and ensure that they stay within that period of hours they're being paid for in the classroom, unlike government schools?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very important one. On the one hand, you would be tempted to say, yes, if private schools are providing better education, let's go on it and focus on those. And it's the case, actually. In many countries, private schools, pay their teachers better, so teachers are more motivated, and as a result, kids are learning more. But then it creates an equity issue, because only those who can afford to go to this private school will get good education. And what you have, and it's a huge challenge in many countries in Africa and also in Europe, by the way, is that you increase the inequality, because you would work with those who have already enough financial means to go to a private school, and their children will get better education, so will be more likely to find a job. While those who live in a rural village far from, whose parents are subsistence farmers and don't have enough money, they will go to a poorly managed government schools and basically remain poor. So in our strategies, we are very open about the challenge that government schools are facing, but we promote inclusive education. We promote education for all. It's very dangerous to go on only on one direction, where you focus on those schools which do better, and you really need to ensure, and that's the only way to reduce poverty, because otherwise, I mean, if you don't work on both aspects, you will basically increase inequality, and that's very dangerous.
Why is government finding it difficult to provide quality education?
Education is often underestimated. Educating kids...
And you saw the children of these leaders studying abroad.
Yeah.
They take their children abroad, studying in Europe, America, UK, and then they cannot even make available quality education for their own citizens.
Yeah, it's an issue.
So what kind of a leadership and government or governance would we call that? And what is an organization as VSO doing to call the government to order to say, this is unfair on your people. Your children go to the best private school or the best school abroad, and the masses are suffering. They go to poorly funded school, and they go to poorly equipped school.
Yeah. So we work on advocacy type of initiatives. There are initiatives like the Global Partnership for Education, which is promoting improvement of education across the continent. In countries, we work with civil society organizations advocating for quality of education. There is a very good example. It's called Twaweza. It's an East African initiative covering Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. And it's a locally established organization, and they created an independent review of the quality of the schools, and they compare countries. So they would compare Uganda and Kenya with Tanzania, for example. And there are similar initiatives in West Africa, but not as strong, I think, as Twaweza. And one of the things I would like to see Twaweza being replicated across the continent, because what they do is very smart. They will say to let's say the Tanzanian president, look, this is what Kenya is doing. It's better than what you do. What are you doing? Because then you start to create a bit of a competition or emulation between different countries. And I think this is what we should do more in our program, is creating a bit of a competition between countries, instead of pointing individual responsibilities, because I think that wouldn't work if you said that. But if you start to say, look, there are countries which are doing good, or there are some within countries, some districts. In VSO we have a program called Champion. We work with champion teachers or champion education officers. And instead of having like a negative advocacy where we point out what does not work, we point out what does work. And we say, look, at this person in his or her district, he or she managed to improve numeracy and literacy by 30% in 5 years. This is the model. Why don't you do that? Or if in Nigeria, in one district, they manage to do that, you go to Ghana and say, look, you can learn from that, and that's the philosophy we have is this kind of positive emulation, and it works. It works very well. So that's something we would like to promote more, working with organizations like Twaweza. And if viewers are interested, I really encourage them to see this organization called twaweza.org. A very smart organization across several countries.
We'd like to have a contact with them and look at how they work as well. But in the discharge of your responsibilities, how do you pass your message across to government? The people that are saddled with the responsibility of managing their affairs, who are using the resources of the people, taxpayers' money, how do you pass your message across to them to say, look, things are not being done very well?
Yeah. We have a partnership approach. So we sang...
are you even getting enough support in country?
We
from
do.
Government?
We do, but one of the things we are doing much more than before is to be much more strict in our partnership agreements. I give you an example. Before, international cooperation was, okay, those countries need help and support, and we are providing the help, whatever happens. Now, it's much more an equal partnership. So if I work with, let's say, the Ministry of Education, we will say, we want a partnership. This is what I put on the table. I would bring you qualified trainers coming from different countries. I would bring some funding to support textbook development, or to print some materials, or to support training. But what do you bring? And that's the key question. I will look for an equal partnership. So we do not want to go anymore in a partnership where the international development organization brings like 90% and then the local partner doesn't bring anything. I give you an example on how it works concretely. We work with the Ministry of Education on vocational training in Tanzania. And in the partnership agreement, we have roles and responsibilities of both parties. And the ministry has a key role and responsibility. For example, normally before we would need to pay per diems for teachers to come at the training. We would need to pay for all the organization cost. No, I say I don't pay for that. Because if you are serious about this program, you need to invest your own money and your own time, and you have the resource. Because the ministry, I mean, sometimes if it's a very local district, they might not have. But at the central level, at least, this is the least they can do, is committing some time and of their staff and also some funding for the training. And I find that works very well, because you don't, and it's also, and then they can say, no, I'm not interested, because if they see that their commitment is too high, they say, oh, no, then I don't do it. Then he says, fine, we don't do it, but then you don't get my part of the deal. And so you are, in a way, much more business-like in your partnership, and that's a great way to work. It's 50-50. You know, there is no one partner above the other, and we are both responsible and accountable for the delivery and what we achieve. Another thing which we do better than before is all the monitoring and evaluation. So before we would measure the success of a program, let's say again in education, by the number of teachers we have trained. Now we say it's not enough. We train 10,000 teachers. What does it mean? Is there a real improvement in the pedagogy or in the way children are learning? No, that's what we will measure now. What is the final impact? And we care less about the number of teachers we train, or we care really about the final impact on beneficiaries. And that's another way to make government more.
Well, how do you measure that? How do you measure that when those teachers probably spend 2-3 hours in the classroom and they spend 3, 4, 5 hours running their own private businesses?
Yeah. But that's a condition. So we put, again, I come back to the agreement with the partner. I will put in the agreement, I want you teachers to commit to be there at school. And if it's not the case, we will stop it. And then it's your responsibility as the ministry to take action to make sure the teachers are there. And if they are not there because they are not enough paid, then address the issue. Because I think it's not sustainable to work artificially, and that's what often happens in development, is that you will pay a per diem to the teacher to come to your training. So the teacher will come because they get a financial incentive.
Yeah.
But then you are not sustainable, because when the project ends and you don't pay anymore, but the teacher goes back to their businesses. So the key to sustainability is indeed to have the government, the ministries, making systematic changes in the way they work, including salary increase for civil servants, to make things having an impact on the long run. And that's the type of discussion we openly have with ministries. So,
all right, fantastic. I've been speaking with Jean Van Wetter, who is a country director, Tanzania country director for VSO. VSO is Volunteering Service Overseas. You want to check them out. What's the website for VSO?
Is www.vsointernational.org.
Okay, that's www.vsointernational.org. They are involved in supporting African government in developing private sector, education, health, livelihood, governance, and of course, citizens' engagement. Vin, we'll have to go on a short break now, but before we go on this short break, let me take you through this question. Developing private sector, we of course we have agreed here today that Africa has enormous human and natural resources, but they are underutilized. How do we get the diaspora in ensuring that the resources in Africa are explored and exploited to the benefit
Other people.
of the people?
It's a very good question. So I think private sector development has become a very important component of our work, because for the issues we mentioned earlier, access to education, if the country, the state, doesn't collect tax, they cannot pay their teacher well. So where are they going to collect tax? You need to have dynamic private sector that is growing and paying tax on the benefits. The problem in many countries is that the private sector is mainly informal. So many of them don't pay tax because it's very small businesses, not very big. So what we are developing is supporting local SMEs, small and medium enterprises, to grow from, let's say, a 5% or a 1% SME to a 100% SME, and moving from the informal economy to the formal economy, so that they can start to recruit and pay people decent salaries and tax. The people can afford education and health services, and the government gets money to develop those in the way European countries develop. But for that, you need an industry. You need to have local industries that can develop local opportunities. Until recently, in many of those countries, it has been driven by foreign investment. An example, mining or oil and gas, extractive industries. Most of the investments have been done by international firms, and there is little capacity development or knowledge transfer. So one of the big programs we are involved in at VSO is to develop the capacity of local SMEs to understand those businesses, the standard it requires to, let's say, to be I will give the example of oil and gas. If a big company is investing in Africa, let's say Shell is investing in Mozambique or in Tanzania and builds LNG, a liquefied natural gas plant, that's a $50 billion investment in one country. It's massive. Give the example of Tanzania. The investment in the gas sector, if it happens, the amount of foreign direct investment in one country in 5 years will be more than what this country received for the last 50 years in foreign direct investments. A game changer opportunity. But how do you make sure that this 5-year investment has a long-term benefit for the local industry? And that's where we work on developing local SMEs, making them much more in line with international standards in terms of health and safety, quality, understanding of the market, understanding of what it takes to be a supplier to one of those big investments, and importantly, local workforce development. So working on vocational training. It's something which is often forgotten. Many people, as in Europe, want to go and be a business person and go and do marketing or finance. But actually what African countries need is a lot of vocational professionals, plumbers, welding, carpentry, all construction-related type of work is very important to develop a country or to develop local plants. Agribusiness, moving away from subsistence farming and just producing some, let's say, vegetables, to really process those vegetables, package them and sell locally or internationally. I'm always shocked, for example, in Tanzania, if I see that coffee, imported coffee, is cheaper than locally produced coffee. That shouldn't be the case. I mean, they should
imported coffee cheaper than locally produced coffee.
Yeah, and why?
That's an aberration.
And why? Because the local producer lack the right technology and efficiency that is brought with technology.
To do mass production that will reduce costs.
Exactly. Textile, the same. Why did Asia, many of those Southeast Asian countries develop on the textile industry? Of course, you can criticize because there were a lot of, people were not paid decently, etc. But still, thousands of people were employed in the textile industry. There is almost no textile industry in Africa. Why not? I know Ethiopia is developing some textile industry.
And the natural resources to get this done is there, but the industries are not there.
Yeah, the cotton, textile cotton is in abundance in most of those countries, but the cotton would go abroad and come back. So all this processing industry is key to support the development of the country.
All right, I've been speaking with Jane Van Wetter. We're going on a very short break now. When we come back, we'll speak more on private sector development and how you and I in the diaspora can add value to what VSO is doing, and of course to improving the quality of life in Africa, and of course helping to eradicate poverty and supporting the government. We'll be back after this break. Don't go away.
And do is to go beyond the confusion and get something really meaningful.
I think very encouraging.
So how did you
All right, yeah, welcome back. We can call into the studio now if you're watching this program. The number to call is 02088080693 to be part of this program. Or you can keep sending us messages on our Twitter account at Ben Television, or you can send it to my private Twitter account at Tunde C3 or at Ben Television, or whichever one you will prefer. Let's get your opinion on what we're taking a look at on the program today. Jane, how well are some of the initiatives that your organization VSO has put in place impacting positively in the fight against poverty in Africa?
Okay. Thanks for the question. As I said earlier, monitoring and evaluation is key, and we invested at VSO quite significantly over the last 3 years to improve our capacity to demonstrate impact on poverty. It's a very difficult task because poverty, doesn't decrease automatically and is often the result of different actions taken in combination and not the result on one single action. So we need to understand very well what are the causes of poverty and how different projects are put together to have an impact. So as I said, I can know what is the impact on mother and child health, or what is the impact on literacy and numeracy.
Yes.
But how it in combination has an impact on overall reduction of the poverty. And generally it takes time. And one of the difficulties we face is that our donors want very quick results. They want to know after 2 years, I gave you 10 million pounds, what is the impact on poverty? And often we cannot say it after 2 years. We can say there are good indicators that show that our theory of change is happening, but the change will generally be seen after 4 or 5 years. So one of the things we would like to do more is to evaluate our actions on the long run and not only on the short run. But globally, I would say we have had very positive results. I give an example, agriculture, working on improving efficiency good agricultural practices and access to market for smallholder farmers in Ghana and in Tanzania and in Kenya. We have some examples where we multiplied the revenues of farmer by 4 in 3 years. Of course, revenue is not enough. You also need to see how farmers reinvest additional income in education or health or other things. But still, it's a good indicator that the actions that we have are working.
Okay, now talking about your donors, very many African countries rely on aids from Europe.
Yeah.
And most of these countries in Europe are also struggling, but they still rely on aids from Europe. How well are these aids adding to the suffering of Africa, or they are alleviating because, say, as a result of corruption or non-corrupt activities?
It's a very good question, and especially now, DFID, the British Government Development Corporation, is doing less and less what they call budget support, so giving money directly to the
African government,
to a government, and investing instead in specific projects, because they don't believe in.
They don't trust them in deploying this money successfully into such projects.
Yeah, and so they want to monitor more closely. There is a debate with pros and cons on both sides. I mean, the pros of government budget support is that it gives autonomy to local government to make their own choice and being less dependent of decision made by European capitals.
Of course, it's their money.
Yeah.
They should have a big say on how their money is spent or is not spent.
Yeah, so they should, I agree with you, that there should be some monitoring, but I think it's the right balance between monitoring and also trusting the way the money is spent. But what I would advocate more is for African countries to be less dependent. And I will give again an example with the oil and gas industry. If I take the example of Tanzania again, the revenues from gas in Tanzania in the next 10 years could be twice the amount that Tanzania receives from all international donors combined. I mean, World Bank, the all European countries, USA, etc. So in a way, they could be fully independent and not depend on donor money anymore. No, the question is, of course, how they are going to disburse those $4 billion that they would receive for the gas industry in terms of tax and other types of contractual arrangements. So that's a question that we are working in, the accountability from extractive industry revenues. But what I mean is that donor aid is not the only source of income, especially when countries are growing by more than 7% annually. So we have to see how, because all the concentration now of the attention is say, oh, those European countries are giving a lot of money, we should monitor, but we should also monitor what are the other flows of income for the countries. And how you do that? By supporting local civil society organizations to increase their advocacy goals, and organizations like I mentioned, Twaweza, strong local civil society organization that can put the government make the government accountable, which I think is more legitimate sometimes than when it's a Western government doing it. Because there is always, I mean, myself, I'm a foreigner in Tanzania, so I would prefer to work with local Tanzanian civil society actors and supporting them in making their advocacy work instead of doing it myself, because I would understand the Tanzanian government say, who are you to tell us how you should manage things? And I think there is a lot of that going on. The more Western countries are trying to make some make local African government more accountable, the more frustrations there are, because the African government say, okay, who are you to tell us lessons on how we should manage our countries? But when it is local organizations, local citizens asking questions, I think it gives much more legitimacy.
Okay, all right. I've got one tweet coming in from one of our viewers saying corruption is the bane of the problems in Africa. And what is your organization doing to ensure that there is accountability. Of course, I've just said it now, that when it comes to foreign countries or donors saying, look, we want accountability for this project, the government will, who are you to tell us? But if they have to rely on aids and foreign donors, then they must be accountable. But this question is basically, how do we deal with poverty and corruption in Africa?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think different levels. I mean, supporting, having, as I said earlier, local civil society organizations,
Yes.
being strong enough, articulated enough, having the right data, having free media to make government accountable is one way. Two is looking at the leadership. There is an institute in Africa called the Wungozi Institute. It means leadership in Swahili, and they try to emulate African leaders to tackle corruption at the highest level. I always believe in the leading by example. It's impossible to tackle corruption at the lower level. Let's say it's a police officer being corrupted or a small district health officer being corrupted, if the top is not leading by example. So I really believe in those leadership programs, and as I mentioned earlier, emulation, competition in some ways between countries. And if you could show examples of one country that could manage and reduce poverty in his or her country, and say, look, this is the way they did, why don't you do the same? And trying to create this regional dynamism. I believe in that. But yes, it's a key, I agree with the viewer, it's a key issue. It's across all the themes that we cover today and which we work on, and it affects our program delivery. At VSO, we also have a zero tolerance on corruption. So if a government officials we are dealing with is corrupted, we will stop the cooperation. We also have a whistleblowing policy. So if one of my colleagues or if somebody externally, one of the beneficiaries, feels that the way we are engaging with the government is not good enough, they can tell, and it's an anonymous email address, and they can report and say we are not happy with the way it's done. We also follow the UK Anti-Bribery Act, which was signed, I think, in 2010 or 2011 after the famous BAE case in Tanzania, where there was a huge corruption scandal, which basically makes us accountable for corruption issues if we cannot demonstrate that we as an organization have done enough to avoid that. So very strict policies. Every new staff training involves a training on corruption and how to deal with it.
Okay, I've got this tweet from one of our viewers who is a Nigerian, who said the oil and gas sector in Nigeria is huge money making for the country, but the people are not feeling the impact.
It's a very good comment as well, and I would agree. I mean, there is this famous Dutch disease syndrome in Nigeria, where all the oil and gas investments resulted in increases of price of commodities, including farming products for everybody. So instead of seeing a benefit, it's making even worse, because people in the street cannot afford anymore to buy food because everything increased. And that's a huge challenge, and we try to learn from the lessons in Nigeria, not only us and NGOs, but I think that oil and gas companies themselves are trying to learn from what went wrong and how we can avoid that kind of issue to happen again. And how we do it, as I said earlier, vocational training, SMEs development, knowledge transfer, very strict what we call local content policy, so obliging the companies to have a very to invest in local enterprise, local content. And there is a big debate now whether it should be compulsory or voluntary. I mean, again, there are pros and cons in both, but at least you need to make everybody conscious that, oil and gas investment does not necessarily benefit to the local people. So that's for VSO actually one of our key strategy, local content, and how you can make it right. And we commission a lot of research on this, and we measure very constantly how we impact on the most vulnerable people in regions where we work.
Okay, all right. I have this email saying probably this person is from somewhere, Sudan or South Sudan, talking about the issue of insurgency and criminal acts. Specifically, the person is making reference to Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and the rest of terrorism acts becoming an issue that African governments are finding difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
What is the way forward?
Yeah, also a very good comment, because it's indeed frightening. What you see in African countries is a variety of situation. Some countries, of course, like South Sudan or the northern part of Kenya, have huge issues linked with terrorism and violence, while other countries like Tanzania or Mozambique are more stable. But the common challenge, I would say, is an important number of young people without a job. And without any hope.
Quality education as well.
Yeah, quality education, but I would say opportunities, seeing that your future is bright. If you are a young person and you don't go to school and you don't know what you're going to do, you don't see any
future,
bright future, you become a target for those kind of terrorist group, and so we need to work on strategies, and I think youth employment is one of the key investment on top of education that should be done in African countries. Again, I'd like to give figures. Tanzania only, every year, 1 million people arrive on the job market.
Every year?
Every year, 1 million people have to find a job in one country.
And the job is not growing at that rate.
The job, sorry?
The job is not growing at that rate. If 1 million would need to find a job every year.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so
the rate of job creation is
not
far
big
less.
Yeah.
So this is also the situation across different African countries. Take a look at even Nigeria as a case study now. 170 million people and still growing at a very fast rate with less job being created. So we say Africa is sitting on a keg of bomb that could explode at any time because attention not being given to employment, not being given to youth education and the rest of it like that. Yes?
Yeah. No, I agree, but it's the reason why I think we need to be very creative. You cannot only rely on formal job creation, while in some countries we will say it's only formal jobs. But in those contexts, you need to think about how to move people from the informal economy to the formal economy, or how to make the informal economy more developed and support entrepreneurship. So we have a lot of entrepreneurship program in different African countries where we work, where we say, actually, you are not only going to find a job for a company or you need to create the job yourself. So we have a partnership with the MasterCard Foundation where we look at how we can make education more relevant to future job opportunities. And that includes introducing entrepreneurship training within the secondary school curriculum and focusing on life skills or employment skills, how to present yourself for an interview, also showing different career paths to very young kids so they can, from an early age, realize the different options they have, but also make them conscious that they will probably need to be entrepreneur and to create their own job.
Sure. Okay, one of our viewers want to find out about the killings of albinos in Tanzania.
Okay. That's also a very good point. It's a big issue, and which the government is taking very seriously. So you have, especially in the Kagera region, in the north west of Tanzania, where there is a huge discrimination, and there are some beliefs that killing an albinos will, that albino people have some witch or some special power, so people are afraid of them. I'm not familiar 100% because we don't work directly with this initiative, But I know that it's an issue, and one of the things the government has done recently, and was one of the first African countries to do, is to have a new law on witchcraft. I'm not sure about the English term, but basically making witchcraft illegal. And that was a premiere. That was a very strong decision on saying this is totally illegal, because before there was a lot of was a non-law area where people wouldn't talk too much, but now at least you have a legal basis to
challenge such absurd,
yes,
barbaric act.
Exactly, yeah. And there is an NGO in Tanzania called Under the Same Sun, which has been very active in advocating the case of albino people or people with albinism, and which is now working on programs to support people with albinism, especially in this region of Kagera. I guess the website is underthesamesun.org, and I would advise to view to have a look at that.
Yeah, as we count down to the end of the program, Jane, let me quickly ask you this: some of these foreign, of course, we will say VOS is a foreign organization working in Africa. Does Africa need to find a path to growth and development using these NGOs, foreign organizations, foreign donors? Why is Africa finding it difficult to create its own path and grow?
Yeah.
Despite the resources?
It's a good question. I believe in partnership, and I believe in learning from the past. I think receiving support from foreign countries is not a bad thing in itself. If you look at Europe, after the Second World War, Europe was rebuilt by the Americans. There was this Marshall Plan. I mean, my country, Belgium, we received plenty of aid from the United States for us to rebuild ourselves. Most of the international organizations, UN like UNICEF, has been built following the World War, because there were many orphans in Europe following the war, and so they needed support, and it was led by international organizations outside of our country. So we use those opportunities as countries to rebuild ourselves, and I would have the same message for African countries. Use this as an opportunity, but don't become dependent on it, and take the most. I really believe in knowledge transfer. Take the most of the people who come and take their skills, and then build your own. And that's the philosophy VSO is working with. We had a strap line before, which was sharing skill, changing life. And I believe in that. Is the way China developed. China, 30 years ago, was a very poor country which was not really counting on the international scene. Look at where they are now. China was very good in knowledge transfer. For every investment in China from a foreign firm, they will oblige to have knowledge transfer, technology transfer, and ownership within Chinese firms. So all the agreement were 51% Chinese and 49 foreigner. So the Chinese were always controlling the foreign investment and making sure that they had the knowledge transfer. Look at where they are now. Of course, still a lot of challenges in China, so I wouldn't say it's a perfect example, but it is this knowledge transfer that China applied, I think, can be applied in some African countries, and that's what we would like to do.
All right, fantastic. I've been speaking with Jean Van Witter, the Tanzania Country Director for Voluntary Service Overseas. It's been a very wonderful time with you, Jean. Thank you for coming, and our sincere appreciation to VSO for obliging us this opportunity to have. We hope we'll continue to enjoy some relationship with you to chat more on the programs of your organization at different African countries. For instance, you are from working in Tanzania. I would like to have the experience of other volunteers and country directors in other African countries to share their experience with us, and how the diaspora, because of course the battle has got to be led by the diaspora before this government. You said it yourself that they will look at you as a foreigner and they say to you, look, what do you mean? You can't control us. But if the battle is actually led by the diaspora, say for instance a Ghanaian in diaspora leading the battle in Ghana, they can actually take them serious.
I agree
We
with
hope
you.
to move this further and have your representatives again at some point on this program.
Thank you
so
very much.
My name is Tunde Alabi, and I'll see you again next week. Do have a very good afternoon. Bye.
Of them, those who matter most. World Remit works with you. We enable you to instantly send money to Africa when they need it. worldremit.com. Download